The United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union, a momentous event commonly known as Brexit, has had far-reaching implications not just for trade, politics and economy, but also for the lives of millions of people. Among the most profoundly affected are the British citizens who, before Brexit, had exercised their right to live and work across various EU member states. For decades, the freedom of movement within the EU allowed these individuals to build lives, families and careers in other European countries with minimal bureaucratic hurdles. However, with the official exit of the UK from the EU, these rights were significantly curtailed, leading to a wave of deportations of British citizens from EU member states. These deportations have often stemmed from the failure of these citizens to comply with residency rules, both before and after Brexit, thus exposing them to harsh realities of new immigration laws. Before Brexit, British citizens enjoyed extensive rights under the EU's freedom of movement provisions. These rights allowed them to reside, work, study and retire in any of the 27 EU member states with few legal obstacles. The process of establishing residency in an EU country was often straightforward, involving little more than registering with local authorities, which was sometimes overlooked or postponed by individuals who did not foresee the potential consequences of non-compliance. In this pre-Brexit environment, the assumption among many British citizens was that their rights were secure and would remain unchallenged. This sense of security led to a certain degree of complacency. Many did not fully comply with local residency requirements, such as registering their presence, obtaining a residence permit, or securing adequate health insurance. While these oversights were often tolerated or overlooked by local authorities under the EU's blanket freedom of movement policy, they become significant liabilities once Brexit was in motion. The Brexit referendum in June 2016 marked the beginning of a period of great uncertainty for British citizens living in the EU. Although the formal exit date was set for January 31st in 2020, followed by a transition period ending on December 31st in 2020, the intervening years were marked by negotiations and political maneuvering. The withdrawal agreement reached between the UK and the EU was intended to provide a legal framework to protect the rights of UK citizens living in EU countries, but it also imposed new obligations on them. One of the key elements of the withdrawal agreement was the requirement for British citizens to apply for a new residence status in their host countries. And this process varied across different EU states, but generally it required proof of legal residence before the end of the transition period. British citizens were required to provide evidence such as rental agreements, utility bills, or bank statements to demonstrate their continuous residence. Those who had not fully complied with pre-Brexit residency rules found themselves at a disadvantage as they struggled to meet these new documentation requirements. With the end of the transition period on December 31st in 2020, the UK became a third country in relation to the EU, meaning that British citizens were no longer entitled to the same automatic rights as EU citizens. Each EU member state adopted its own procedures for British citizens to apply for residency under the terms of the withdrawal agreement. While the agreement provided some protections for those who had been legally residents before the cut-off date, those who failed to apply for the new status or who could not prove their legal residency faced severe consequences, including deportation. The challenges of navigating these new rules were significant. In some cases, the process was complicated by bureaucratic inefficiencies, lack of clear information, and inconsistent enforcement across different countries. For example, in France and Spain, the application process required extensive documentation, and those who could not provide it were left in legal limbo. In other cases, individuals who had lived in their host country for many years but had not formalized their residency status faced immediate threats of deportation. The post-Brexit residency rules also introduced new challenges for British citizens who had previously relied on the flexibility offered by EU membership. For instance, retirees who had settled in popular destinations like Spain and Portugal found that their residency was contingent on meeting income thresholds or obtaining private health insurance, requirements that they might not have previously fulfilled or been aware of. One of the primary reasons for the deportation of British citizens from EU member states has been the failure to comply with residency rules, both before and after Brexit, as I said. Before Brexit, many British citizens did not take the necessary steps to secure their legal residency in their host countries. And this included neglecting to register with local authorities, failing to renew residence permits, or not meeting conditions such as maintaining health insurance or sufficient income. And these oversights became critical after Brexit as the legal landscape changed dramatically. The enforcement of post-Brexit residency rules has been strict in some EU countries, with authorities taking action against those who were unable to meet the new criteria. In the Netherlands, for instance, there have been cases where British citizens were deported for not applying for their residency status within the specified deadlines. Similarly, in Spain, where a large number of British citizens reside, the authorities have taken a firmer stance on ensuring that all residents comply with the new rules. Those who failed to meet these requirements, such as providing proof of continuous residence or demonstrating financial independence, found themselves once again at risk of deportation. The issue of non-compliance is further complicated by the varying interpretations and enforcement practices across different EU member states. While some countries have adopted a more lenient approach, allowing British citizens extra time to regularize their status, others have been less forgiving, leading to a patchwork of enforcement that has left many individuals confused and vulnerable. The deportation of British citizens from EU member states post-Brexit has not only legal, but also significant humanitarian and social implications. Many of those affected have lived in their host countries for years and sometimes even decades, and have established deep roots in their local communities. These individuals often own homes, have jobs, and have integrated into the social fabric of their host countries. For them, deportation is not just a legal inconvenience, but a life-altering event that can result in the loss of employment, housing, and social ties. The humanitarian impact is particularly severe for vulnerable groups, such as the elderly or those with health issues, who may find it difficult to meet the new residency requirements. For example, retirees living on fixed incomes, they may struggle to prove financial independence or secure this private health insurance, both of which are often prerequisites for residency. And similarly, individuals with health conditions who rely on local healthcare services may find themselves cut off from essential care if they are deported or forced to relocate. And moreover, the deportation of British citizens has raised questions about the treatment of long-term residents and the protection of human rights. But we still have to say it was not the choice of the EU. The sudden enforcement of new residency rules without adequate transitional support has been criticized as disproportionately harsh, particularly for those who were unaware of the full implications of Brexit or who were unable to navigate the complex bureaucratic processes involved in securing their residency status. The deportation of British citizens from EU member states also has broader legal and political implications. The enforcement of post-Brexit residency rules has highlighted the challenges of disentangling the UK from the EU's legal and also social frameworks. It has also underscored the importance of clear communication and consistent enforcement of rules across different jurisdictions. From a legal perspective, the deportation cases raise important questions about the interpretation and implementation of the withdrawal agreement, but that's why we have 2026. And while the agreement was designed to protect the rights of UK nationals living in the EU and vice versa, the reality on the ground has often been more complicated. Differences in national legislation, because of sovereignty, administrative practices and levels of enforcement have led to a situation where the rights of British citizens are unevenly protected across the EU. And politically, the issue of deportations has the potential to strain relations between the UK and individual EU member states. The UK government has expressed concerns about the treatment of its citizens abroad, and there have been calls for greater diplomatic efforts to ensure that British citizens are treated fairly and in accordance with the withdrawal agreement. Although I think, if you remember the beginning of the video, you know where the fault in many cases was. On the other hand, EU member states have emphasized the importance of enforcing their national laws and ensuring that all residents, including British citizens, comply with local residency requirements. The deportation of British citizens from EU member states in the wake of Brexit is a complex and multifaceted issue that reflects the broader challenges of the UK's departure from the EU. The loss of automatic residency rights, combined with a varied enforcement of new residency rules, has created significant legal and humanitarian challenges for British citizens living in the EU. To mitigate the impact of these changes, it is essential that both the UK and the EU member states adopt a compassionate and consistent approach to the enforcement of residency rules, but it also needs the people to obey the rules of the country they want to live in. But this includes providing clear and accessible information to affected individuals, offering adequate support for those who need to regularize their status, and ensuring that deportation is used as a last resort rather than as a punitive measure. Furthermore, ongoing diplomatic efforts will be necessary to address the broader legal and political implications of these deportations and to ensure that the rights of British citizens are protected in accordance with international agreements. As the post-Brexit landscape continues to evolve, it will be crucial for all parties involved to prioritize the well-being of individuals caught in the crossfire of these complex legal and political processes. And you have seen that I did this video for once from a more British citizen point of view. We talked about others as well. We will talk about EU citizens again. But in this case, there were cases where people really got into trouble without that being their own fault. That's why I got the compassionate part, etc., into the video. But in a big number of the cases, it was just this complacency I mentioned in the beginning of the video that brought the people into trouble, because when they lived there, they said, I don't care about the rules here. I just do as I want. And then, in the end, they paid the price for it because Brexit changed everything. And it was so complicated because residency is a sovereign national matter of all EU member states. So this once again proves one of the big lies in the Brexit campaign, that the UK would have lost their sovereignty in this point. The only thing that was there for immigration was that EU citizens could live, work and study everywhere in the EU. But that was something the UK helped to bring into life. We must not forget that one. Nevertheless, if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.